Lannister Red Cloaks are elite guardsmen who serve as the enforcement arm of House Lannister in King's Landing and Casterly Rock. Their job is to keep the population in check through intimidation, fear, and sharp blades. They're notable not just for their crimson cloaks, but also their half-plate armor, itself as well made as mass-produced armor can be. They're solid medium infantry and among the best-paid troops in the Lannister roster. Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video we're going to be focusing on the House Lannister Red Cloaks that are very near to releasing. The House Lannister Red Cloaks are a infantry combat unit comprised of 12 models, and amongst those there are 5 unique sculpts. We've got our standard 4 regular infantry bodies and then 1 banner bearer that comes in the box. We don't get any fancy attachments in this box, but that shouldn't be a problem considering that the Lannisters have quite a few of them available. So for 6 points you get a movement speed of 5, a defense save of 4+, a morale save of 6+, and then their longsword attack hits on 3s or better and has a 7.54 decay rate as their ranks go down. When we take a look at the special rules that this unit brings with us, or brings with them at least, the first one is Fearless Avarice, and this says while you control the wealth zone on the tactics board, this unit suffers -1 wound from failed panic tests. The other ability they bring is Lannister Justice. While you control the crown zone, each time this unit performs an action, before resolving that action, one enemy in long range suffers 1 panic test with -1 to the roll for each remaining rank in this unit. So before we start digging into the efficacy of this unit or any of the other synergies that are surrounding it, I did want to kind of address the elephant in the room. So the Red Cloaks are probably one of the most controversial releases out of this new wave of things that are hitting in the 2021 update. Not just the update, it just coincides with it, right? So the reason why there's such a pain in the butt right now is that for Lannister Justice, this ability becomes problematic given the way that some of the updates for the 2021 rule set have kind of unpacked in the rulebook itself. At current, the wording on the charge action is set up in a way that a charge action is essentially comprised of 2 game-defined actions. You have the declaring the charge, a charge action, and then once you end up connecting with your enemy, you perform a melee attack action. And so currently, as the rules are written in that, the Lannister Justice essentially goes off twice every time you end up declaring a charge. Some of the things that I can already hear many people's eyes rolling through the internet, and some of the things that make this a little bit wonky is that a lot of people end up referring to the little easy to remember rules thing at the back of each rule book, and the charge action itself doesn't specifically say it's got an action nested inside of it, but then when you end up looking at the rules on the stakes, or not the stakes, but the dangerous rule that can be attributed to terrain, it'll specifically say on there that you only suffer 1 instance of those wounds from the dangerous terrain based on a charge. So it almost kind of insinuates that even within that rule about the dangerous terrain, that charges are 2 actions. And then there's also some pushback in that in 1.6 there was an errata or an FAQ that had stated that charges would only be considered 1 action, and that was kind of part of the problem with alleviating the stakes a little bit, because the stakes, they always, if you moved on it, you'd take damage, and then you take an action, you'd take damage. So that's where some of that kind of plays in with the whole taking only 1 instance of the dangerous wounds from the charge. So my money says that when we get our first errata or FAQ for the 2021 update, that charges will no longer be considered 2 actions. I think that that's something that, at least that's my expectation, I guess. I can't say that I have like a crystal ball or anything like that to see how this is supposed to work, But I think that the Lannister Red Cloaks really kind of make things problematic, and then if there's any other thing that happens in the future or at current that is based off of it is based off of taking actions, that this will just kind of exacerbate the problem. And I think that as it stands, playing the rules as they're written is the way that I would probably just go about doing things, but I can definitely understand and respect someone wanting to play these the way that we think that it's going to shake out, because I think as it stands, Lannister Justice is just a little bit too good when we're treating a charge as two actions. So with that out of the way, we can go back to the reason why we're here, is to just talk about the Lannister Red Cloaks as a whole instead of the screwball-y rules that we're kind of living with right now. So just looking at the Lannister Red Cloaks, you can kind of see that this is a unit that is, they're coming in with that Mountains Men attack stat, which is pretty aggressive at that 754. The decay is a little steep, but I think that's me thinking about old 1.6 decay stats. I think that the 754 is getting to be a little bit more common, but 7 starting out is really good, especially when you're hitting on 3s. They have a really decent... They have decent defensive stats, being a 4+ save and a 6+ morale. Plus, if you've got that coin zone, they're not taking as many wounds from panic tests, so even if they do fail, there's a good chance that they don't take any wounds on it. Well, there's a 33% chance they don't take any wounds on it if your opponent's not messing with any of that panic stuff. So Lannister Justice is actually a really cool ability, even if you take away the idea that charges are two actions. If we live in a world where charges are only one action, every time you've got that crown and you do something, you're going to be panic zapping someone. And I really do appreciate the idea that the panic tests in the game have gotten a little less powerful. But with the Lannisters, who had a lot of their faction identity kind of baked around some of this panic stuff, they end up getting a lot of that plugged back in through some of their units and NCUs to kind of make that feel like it's more of a thing for them, and not having all of these extra ways to bump up the wounds or the D3+1 that we used to have. I think that being able to create these panic checks pretty regularly is going to be something that they really do enjoy, and will make it so that when you're playing against Lannisters, you've still got to plan for those really rough morale stat units. If they've got that 7 or worse, you're going to be having some hard times going into Lannisters, because even after, and this is make-believe world where this actually is, it actually happens this way, I think it's more likely that we'll see a change to the rules instead of a change to the Red Cloaks. But even after we go into a world where charge actions become one action completely, the Lannister Justice ability on the Red Cloaks is still really good and super worth taking. So before we go into the attachments, I wanted to take a look at a couple of the NCUs in the Lannister army, just because there's a couple here that really synergize well with the Red Cloaks, and I think that it's good to mention them. The first one we're going to take a look at is the High Sparrow. He has the ability called Fealty to the 7, and this is just an influence NCU that, while influencing an enemy, each time that enemy suffers wounds from failing a panic test, you target one friendly unit in long range. They restore that many wounds up to 3. So you're going to be doing a lot of panic tests with the Red Cloaks. They're survivable enough to where they're not going to be one shot off the table. That probably will take 3 or 4 combats based on some healing and some effects like this before your opponent really gets rid of them. And with that, you're probably looking at maybe doing anywhere from at least 2 to 3, maybe even 4 panic tests off of them per round if you can get the right things, or you get that charge in current state. But just being able to say, I'm going to put the influence from the High Sparrow on this unit that I'm going to bully with the Red Cloaks, and then you should, given if you have any modifiers to make those panic tests worse, or that unit has a pretty bad morale stat, even if it's average, or even above average a little bit. If we're looking at a 6+ morale unit, you end up getting -1 for each remaining rank on the on the red cloaks. So you're still looking at taking those above average units and making them fail on average with all of these negatives. And the Lannisters aren't really short of being able to get more negatives built up on a unit. And having the High Sparrow there means that you can still keep that unit filled up and make sure that they're a pain in the butt for your opponent throughout the long run of the game. It's also worth noting that you could choose any other friendly unit within long range, which is still quite a long... It's a massive amount of table, depending on where you're at. I think it was 29 inches, 29 and a half inches of influence for being able to fill back a unit. And there's no restriction on not being able to fill up something like cavalry as well. So you can get a lot of use out of someone like the High Sparrow. The next NCU I want to look at before moving on to attachments is going to be Joffrey Baratheon. So he has the Might of the Iron Throne ability, which just kind of says that if he takes a zone that's not the crown, you end up getting one of your units panicked by your enemy. And then when Joffrey's on the tactics board, you're always considered to be controlling the crown. And then you also have the influence ability that says, while influencing an enemy, that enemy suffers +1 wound from failing panic tests. So Joffrey's kind of like the perfect NCU to be bringing with red cloaks. I think that some people might consider him to be an auto include, and I think that might be accurate if you were running 2 red cloaks and wanted to make sure you got all those panic abilities off, but I don't think it's necessary to run him if you're only running 1. But there are a lot of other ways in the Lannister faction that you can get utilization off the crown, and your cards get bumped up by it quite a bit as well. This is always going to make sure that you can stop your opponent from... Well, you can always re-roll the die on counterplot with Joffrey kind of hanging around as long as you put him on that tactics board first. The really cool thing about Joffrey is that he has that cool influence ability that he's come with now, where whenever your enemy fails a panic test, they suffer an additional wound, and that's probably one of the bigger reasons why I want to include him. Like, your opponent can definitely snipe the crown zone away from you if you're not running something like Joffrey, and then your red cloaks don't get to take advantage of that Lannister justice ability. But just having Joffrey, not only for being able to pick the crown all the time, but making sure that your opponent suffers +1 wound from all those panic tests that they fail, is going to go a long way when we're starting to see how many panic checks we can actually cause off of something like the Lannister red cloaks. It also is one of those things where your opponent kind of still has to take that crown zone, because they know you're going to have it with Joffrey no matter what. But if they decide to pull off of that, they're just giving you an ability to shoot another panic check out there at -1, and I don't think anyone will want to do that based on how many panic checks a list like this could actually shoot out. So Joffrey is an extremely valuable NCU when we're running red cloaks. I don't want to say that he's like stapled to them. I think you can play a list without Joffrey. It just becomes a little bit less reliable if you're trying to really run the panic game with them. But I think if I were to ever make a list with red cloaks in it, Joffrey would probably be the first NCU I grab. So when looking at attachments, I want to bring up, I could talk about pretty much all of the Kingsguard, but there's one in particular that I want to talk about here, and that's going to be Mandon Moore. So Mandon Moore comes in at 1 point, which is much, much better than his 2 points that he was last time, and Dominance of the Crown is the ability that he gets to modify melee attacks for the unit that he's in, and this just states that if you control the Crown zone when this unit's performing a melee attack, this attack gains +1 to hit and Sundering. So one of the things about the Red Cloaks is that they don't really have any schnazzy things when it comes to fighting. They've got the hit on 3s, which is good, but their stats are like, you know, they don't have anything fancy to do with their weapons, no vicious, no precision, no sundering or anything. But for 1 point, making the unit hit on 2s and then giving them sundering is really, really good. And I think that Mandon Moore has probably kind of catapulted himself up, at least in my opinion, in as one of the best Kingsguard your points can buy. So if you're doing something like bringing Mandon Moore, you're probably going to be bringing Joffrey as well. So you're always going to have this as long as Joffrey is on that tactics board. And I think that he's a fine addition to any Red Cloak unit just to try and make sure that they can also cut through the bodies that they're in. Now, don't have to really spend a whole lot of effort or, like, this isn't like Man and More isn't the first thing you grab when you're building a list with red cloaks in it that has Joffrey, but for me, I really would like to try and get through that combat quicker so I can move on to the next thing and just kind of use the red cloaks as like a bulldozer. And you could definitely avoid him if you just want to really lean in on the panic checks to do the work for you. But this kind of makes it so that you have a fallback plan in case your opponent drops a list that has really good morale to the point where it's difficult for you to be putting out those extra wounds through those panic tests. Just hitting on 2s and having Sundering means that you're going to be pretty scary for the entirety of the game, especially if you're healing these guys up to keep throwing those 7 dice. Another attachment I want to talk about here is another 1-point steal in the game, and that's going to be Tyrion Lannister, the Giant of Lannister. So he has the ability Counter Strategy, where it's an order that triggers when an enemy in short range uses an order or is targeted by a tactics card. You roll a die, and on a 3+, you cancel the effect of that order or tactics card. So being 1 point now is making it very difficult for me to build any Lannister list without Tyrion in it, and the Lannister Red Cloaks have a survivable enough stat, and there's enough healing and all that in the Lannister faction that it's going to be difficult for your opponent to be removing someone like Tyrion Lannister from the game. The Red Cloaks just don't get their rank shaved down quickly. And when we think about what it takes for your opponent to try and handle Red Cloaks with all these panic checks and just the fighting in general, they're usually going to want to play things that make them automatically pass morale checks or heal the unit back up through cards, or using their own orders to kind of push through to slice off ranks from your Red Cloaks. Tyrion gives you an ability to stop that. It's a 66% chance, which is better than a coin flip at least, but we have a bunch of other ways that we can try and utilize this counter strategy to make it better. But when you think about some of the things that people are really talking about in the Mindspace meta of Ice and Fire right now, the 3-point attachments that give you an order to do an extra action are going to be pretty common, I think. And having something like Tyrion in there to just, for 1 point, a 66% chance to shut that 3 points down is pretty good, and I think that he's going to find a home in a lot of Lannister lists just as an easy plug-in for a unit that wants to be on the front lines and can actually sustain, which is what the Red Cloaks really do here. Moving on to commanders is probably one of the Lannister commanders I'm most excited about in this new 2021 world, and that's going to be Tywin Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock. So the attachment for Tywin's commander has 2 orders on him. One of them is Threaten, where you just target an enemy in long range and they become weakened. And then the other one is Lannister Supremacy. So this triggers after an enemy completes an attack on this unit, you target the attacker, they suffer 1 panic test and -1 to their roll and +1 wound on failure for each remaining rank in this unit. So sticking him in a Red Cloak unit is going to be pretty good because you've got, they're going to be up in the middle of the table again. That 29-inch aura of being able to throw down a weakened token and have it be really effective wherever you go is good. It keeps the Red Cloaks alive longer and really turns on a lot of the other tricks that Tywin brings along with him. But Lannister Supremacy is also really, really mean on the Red Cloaks because you're going to be attacking your opponent and zapping them with a panic check from the Red Cloaks. Then they're going to want to attack you back, and then you get to zap them for panic as well with that one. So Tywin can really exacerbate the panic game that the Red Cloaks are trying to bring. So I think that he's a really competitive choice to be putting in that unit. So the power of Tywin with Red Cloaks doesn't end at just his commander attachment. That does broadcast and carry through to his cards. And the first one we're going to look at is Exploit Weakness. So this triggers when a friendly unit's performing an attack before you roll the attack dice. You can expend 1 weakened token from the defender, and if you do, they become panicked, vulnerable, and if the attacker is Tywin's unit, you can re-roll any attack dice. So this is a really neat way to try and convert what you need to have a unit doing or what you need your opponent's unit to be doing. So the weakened token is a very defensive condition token. So if you're not needing that right away, or you're keeping the numbers pretty high on your Red Cloaks, you can go ahead and convert that weakened token that you don't need anymore to be a very offensive set of tokens. Being able to put vulnerable and panicked on an enemy with the red cloaks is especially really good, because the vulnerable is going to help you get some damage through to cause a panic check. And then since they're panicked, you can utilize that token based on the timing of how this all works out. You can use it on Lannister Justice, or if you don't need it for Lannister Justice, you can use it for the panic test that your opponent will hopefully be taking from the attack. And if it's Tywin's unit, of course, being a 3+ is good, but being able to reroll that if you're stuck in combat is also pretty nice as well. So I think Exploit Weakness is one of those cards that you can definitely pocket for when your opponent comes into Tywin. You can kind of threaten them with that weaken token, and if they're deciding to kind of wait on it, you can just go ahead and exploit weakness and make sure you're putting through all the extra damage you need with these condition tokens, since the red cloaks take advantage of all of it. Another really nasty one here is Broken Resolve. This is a new one for Tywin, and it triggers when a weakened enemy activates. You can attach this card to that unit until the weakened token is removed, and then while this card is attached, that unit suffers -2 to morale test rolls. So this is a fun card to utilize against your opponent when they start an activation. If they've got the top of the turn or something and they're already engaged with something like the red cloaks, they're probably going to want to do things like take that combat zone on the tactics board and try and make sure that you're not getting it to force more panic tests. But by doing that, they're allowing you to get this opportunity to put Broken Resolve on a weakened unit before they get a chance to try and remove the weakened token. And then that's just going to be not really great for them, because you're going to be giving them a -2 bubble as long as that weakened token stays on them, and that just means that the red cloaks are going to be carrying more damage through the panic checks, especially if you're doing something like taking the crown, and it's just really gross. I know it's mitigatable by removing the weakened tokens, and I think with as prevalent as condition tokens are going to be in the new version of the game, the long-term benefits of something like Broken Resolve are going to be a little bit dodgy, but you can still utilize this to really force a lot of damage on something that maybe is having an easier time passing those panic checks. And if you take the coin zone away from your opponent on the following turn, it means that they won't be able to just kind of remove that token and, mitigate the -2 to the morale test rolls, so that later on in the turn you can start activating that Lannister red cloak unit and really just starting to take advantage out of those morale test roll, or out of the negative modifier to morale test rolls through Broken Resolve. Tywin's last card is Issue Commands, so we've seen this on a couple other commanders already, and you can either just do one of two modes. Either when your commander activates, you can forego doing anything with them to let another unit within long range do a charge or attack action, or at the start of any turn, you can remove an order token from a unit, and then they can use that order again this round. So Issue Commands, it seems like it's not the greatest card for Tywin when he's sitting in a unit of red cloaks. There are always going to be corner case scenarios where you don't want to have Tywin's unit activate and you'd rather get more influence with another unit. Like, let's say if you do happen to bring 2 units of red cloaks, you can say Tywin's unit has done their thing and I would rather have this other unit of red cloaks doing more of their panic tests and more attacks on this unit they're engaged with. So you can juggle that over there. The other thing is that Tywin has 2 orders that are really good. Being able to put those weakened tokens out, and especially Lannister Supremacy, if your opponent is taking that combat zone away from you often to kind of mitigate the amount of panic checks you're throwing with a red cloak unit, you can use the Lannister Supremacy order right away and then not have to worry about it later when your opponent tries to attack again, because you can do this at the start of any turn. You don't have to like hold it for anything or do something and make sure that your opponent like knows what's going on. So being able to remove those orders is nice. And if we go back to the Tyrion attachment, you can also remove that order token from him. So there's definitely plenty of ways that you can get use out of both modes of issue commands here, and it's just a value card. I think of all the new tactics cards that I've seen, this is probably one of the best and probably one of the most powerful ones that I think is in the game right now. It's just so versatile. So the Lannister Red Cloaks seem like a really legit unit to bring with any Lannister army, really. You don't really need to lean into the panic game so much to get a lot of use out of them, but being able to do so can definitely help you in terms of trying to push some of those wounds. And with all the negative modifiers, there really isn't a whole lot in terms of good morale stat units that are really safe from something like Lannister Red Cloaks with a bunch of other modifiers kicking around on them as well. I think that for me, the 2 Red Cloaks is what I would go for right now in terms of purchasing. I think that at 6 points, they're easy to fit in 2 units of these. And if the charge rules get adjusted so that it is only 1 action, I think that having 2 of them is going to help you broadcast those panic tests a lot more. And we'll just really go for, we'll help you kind of push forward your own agenda and making sure that the list works the way that you want it to. 1 unit is fine. I think that they're probably one of the better units right now in the Lannister army if you want to have a bunker for a commander. This is also a great unit for something like Jaime Lannister because he's very forward-facing and just does a lot for the combat prowess that you can staple onto these. But I do like a lot of the Tywin synergies because he just seems like a super monster with them. One of the other things that I wanted to mention, which is kind of like a kudos to Cool Mini or Not for the way that 1.7 has kind of shaken out, or the 2021 version has shaken out, is that prior to this edition of the game, I didn't really think of panic checks, or the panic system, right, as something that was utilized in the way that it is for the Lannisters right now, like thematically. So I always thought of panic as like, oh, I just watched some people around me die or get their heads caved in by some kind of club or something. I'm going to run away because I am scared of what's going on in this combat with me. But with the Lannisters, for whatever reason, it feels like a lot of things have kind of focused in for me a little bit on how this how the panic system works for them, is that the Lannisters are an intimidating faction. When you've got something like the Red Cloaks or Tywin running around, or something, something like some of these Kingsguard that are just like brutal and ruthless, the Lannisters really kind of show that we're an intimidating force to be dealt with because we've got the military power, we've got the strength, and we've got the money and power to be able to kind of convert the battlefield the way we want to. And if you're not scared of us when you're fighting, it means you're either really, really reckless or stupid, and I think you kind of need to be a little bit of both in order to be sitting across the table from someone like Tywin and not feel intimidated by his presence, right? So I think that that's something that I don't know if it's maybe my perspective on the game has changed a little bit, or if it's just that Cool Mini or Not did a lot to kind of pull that all into perspective for me through the rules, but the Lannister Red Cloaks really do a good job of kind of conveying that point, and that these guys aren't just like innately scary. It's a lot that they've got the armor, the big flowing red cloaks, and the lions everywhere. Like, these are Lannister's like finest in quotes, and it makes it it's really easy to get shaken by them on the battlefield. And I think that's one of the really cool things about a lot that's been going on in the game, is just kind of focusing in that feel and theme of the game in these factions. Thanks for making it to the end of the video on this one. I'm interested to see how other people are folding the Lannister Red Cloaks into their list building, and what you think about some of the attachments, especially Kingsguard. I think there's a lot of cool things going on with Kingsguard right now, to where I can almost find a reason to use just about every single one of them, whereas, someone like Mandon Moore has kind of gone from being the absolute worst to being probably one of the best ones that they have available to them. So let me know in the comments below if you've got some insight on any of that at all, because I'm not a regular Lannister player. I kind of like I'm an observer, I think, when it comes to Lannisters. Most of the Lannister stuff I played was faith-based, but I'm looking really forward to trying to play some Tywin stuff here, and getting some list builds going with him as well. So again, thanks for watching these. It's been great kind of seeing the responses to the videos lately, and it's really giving me a lot of motivation to kind of finish out these new units to focus on before we start getting into some of my old list building and things like that. So thanks a lot, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.